The bank called me on a quiet afternoon, the kind of afternoon that feels soft and slow, the kind where nothing bad is supposed to happen. I remember because I was standing in the kitchen. The kettle was boiling, the window was open just a little. I could hear birds outside and a neighbor sweeping their porch. My phone rang and I almost did not answer it. Unknown number. I thought it might be a mistake, but something inside me said, "Pick it up." So I did. The woman on the line spoke politely. Her voice was calm, professional, practiced. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We're calling from the bank. We just wanted to A single choice can change your life forever. Today, I'm sharing how betrayal forced me to choose myself when no one else would. Before the first chapter unfolds, please subscribe and hit like to help us reach others who might need to hear this. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave your city name in the comments so I can welcome you personally. And now, the story begins. Firm a transaction made at our downtown branch today. I told her my name. I told her, yes, that was my account. She paused for a moment. Then she said something that made my hand go cold around the phone. "Your husband is here in person," she said gently, "and he is accompanied by another woman." I did not answer right away. I thought maybe I heard her wrong. I said, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" She repeated it, slowly, clearly. My husband, at the bank, with another woman. But my husband was supposed to be away. He had kissed my forehead that morning. He had packed a small bag the night before. He told me he would be gone for 3 days. Work trip, he said. Another city, another hotel, another long stretch of silence between us. I leaned against the counter because my legs suddenly felt weak. The kettle was still screaming, but I could not move to turn it off. "There must be a mistake," I said quietly. "My husband is not in town." The woman hesitated. I could hear papers moving on her desk. "I understand," she said, "but he is here. I can see him." I closed my eyes. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. No thoughts, no feelings, just a deep, heavy quiet. Then the questions came rushing in, fast, loud, unkind. If he was not away, where had he gone? Who was that woman? How long had this been happening? And how long had I been living inside a lie? The kettle boiled dry behind me, the room filled with steam, and in that small kitchen, my life began to change. I had been married to my husband for 22 years. That is a long time to share a life with someone, long enough to know the sound of their footsteps, long enough to understand their silences, long enough to believe you know their heart. We met when we were young, not children, but not fully grown either. We were both trying to find our place in the world. He was gentle back then, soft-spoken, careful with his words. I liked that about him. I was louder, more emotional, more open. We balanced each other, or so I believed. We built our life slowly. No sudden miracles, no big surprises. We rented a small apartment, we saved money little by little, we argued about small things and made up before bedtime. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter. They grew faster than I was ready for. Our home was never perfect, but it was warm. Dinners together, quiet weekends, shared worries about bills and school and health. Over time, things changed. Not all at once, just enough that you notice only when you look back. My husband became quieter, more distant. He worked longer hours, he came home tired. Sometimes he smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I told myself it was stress, work pressure, age. I told myself all the things women tell themselves when they do not want to face the truth. He started traveling more, short trips at first, then longer ones. I packed his bags without complaint. I kissed him goodbye. I waved from the doorway. I trusted him, because trust, once built, feels like something solid, like a floor under your feet. You do not expect it to break. On the outside, our life looked normal, stable,
respectable. Inside, something was slowly pulling apart, but I did not know that yet. That morning, before the bank called, everything felt ordinary. I made breakfast, I cleaned the table, I watered the plants near the window. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt, how peaceful. Sometimes peace is not peace at all. Sometimes it's just the calm before the truth arrives.
After the call ended, I sat down at the kitchen table. I did not move for a long time. The chair felt cold under me, like it did not belong in my house anymore. I kept looking at my phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for someone to say there had been a mistake, waiting for the world to return to how it was an hour earlier. But nothing happened. The house was too quiet. Every sound felt louder than it should be. The clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, my own breathing. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself banks make errors. I told myself there must be a simple reason. Yet my heart did not believe those words. I stood up and walked through the rooms slowly. The living room, the hallway, our bedroom. Everything looked the same, but it did not feel the same. His pillow was still shaped like his head. His shoes were still by the door. His jacket still hung on the hook. I touched the jacket. It was empty, cold. That was when memories began to surface, small moments I had pushed aside before. The way he started guarding his phone, turning it face down, stepping outside to take calls. The way his trips became more frequent, and how he always seemed tired when he came home, not just tired in his body, but tired in his eyes. I remembered the nights we ate dinner in silence, not angry silence, just distance. I would talk about my day, he would nod, sometimes smile, but his mind felt elsewhere, like he was living a life I could not see. At the time, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I had become boring. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I did not listen enough. Now, those thoughts felt heavy and unfair. I sat on the edge of the bed and held my phone again. I wanted to call him back. I wanted answers. But fear stopped me. Fear of hearing the truth spoken out loud. Instead, I opened his side of the closet. I do not know why. I was not looking for proof. I think I was looking for comfort. His clothes hung neatly, like always, but one shirt was missing, a shirt I knew well. He wore it on special days, when he wanted to look nice, when he wanted to impress. My chest tightened. I sat there and thought about the woman the bank mentioned. I did not imagine her face. I did not imagine her voice. I only imagined how close they must have been to stand together, side by side, in a public place, while I was at home, trusting, waiting. I finally called him again. This time he answered faster. "I need you to be honest," I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me. There was a sigh on the other end, a tired one. "It's complicated," he said. That word felt like a door closing. "Is she someone I know?" I asked. "No," he replied. Quickly. Too quickly. "Has this been going on for a long time?" Another pause. "Please," he said. "Not now." Not now. Those words hurt more than anger would have. They told me everything I needed to know. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat there again, alone with my thoughts, alone with years of trust unraveling quietly inside me. I did not cry yet. The tears stayed somewhere deep. What I felt was a slow, spreading ache, like something precious breaking, not all at once, but piece by piece. That night I did not cook dinner. I did not turn on the television. I sat by the window and watched the sky grow dark. I wondered how many nights he had spent somewhere else, smiling at someone else, sharing words that once belonged to me. The rising conflict was not loud. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors. It was quiet, slow, and deeply personal. And I knew even then that whatever came next would change me forever. That night, I barely slept. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Every sound felt sharper than usual, as if the walls themselves were listening with me. I kept replaying the phone call in my head, the woman's calm voice, the careful words, the way she said another woman as if it was just a detail, not a knife. I wondered how many times my husband had stood beside someone else while I was here, believing in him. I wondered if he felt guilty in those moments, or if guilt had slowly left him the way warmth leaves a room when a window is left open. At some point before dawn, I sat up in bed. Sleep was not coming. I did not want it anymore. I walked into the living room and turned on a small lamp. The light was soft and yellow. It made everything look gentle, even though nothing felt gentle inside me. I told myself I needed the truth, not part of it, not a softened version, the whole thing. So I decided I would go to the bank myself. The next morning, I moved through the house slowly. I made my bed, I washed my face, I dressed as if it were an ordinary day. I chose simple clothes, nothing bright, nothing that asked for attention. Before leaving, I stood at the door for a moment. I looked back at the house that had held my life for so many years. It looked the same, but I felt like a stranger walking out. The bank was only a short drive away. Every red light felt longer than it should. Every passing car felt like it was carrying a secret I did not know. When I arrived, my hands were trembling slightly. I held them together to keep them still. Inside, the bank was quiet. Cool air, soft footsteps, low voices. The woman from the phone call recognized me right away. I could see it in her eyes. She greeted me kindly, too kindly. We sat at a small desk near the window. Sunlight spilled across the floor, bright and honest, as if the world did not care what was happening to me. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she said. Her voice was gentle. I nodded. I did not trust my voice yet. She explained the situation slowly, that my husband had come in to make changes to an account, that he had brought someone with him, that the woman had spoken confidently, like she belonged there. She said she was family, the banker said quietly. Family. The word echoed in my chest. I asked a few questions, simple ones. Dates, times. Each answer felt like a small stone being added to a growing weight inside me. When I left the bank, the sun felt too bright, the sky too blue. I sat in my car and held the steering wheel without starting the engine. I felt numb, not broken yet, just emptied. On the drive home, I did not cry. Tears still refused to come. Instead, my mind began to wander through memories, not just recent ones, old ones. I remembered the first time my husband lied to me about something small, years ago, something that did not matter much at the time. I remembered brushing it off, telling myself it was nothing. I remembered all the times I had chosen peace over questions, silence over truth. Back home, I noticed something I had not before. The house felt staged, like a place meant to look like a home, not truly be one. I opened drawers I had not opened in years, not searching exactly, just looking. In his desk drawer, I found receipts, hotels, restaurants. None of them were from the city he had told me about. I sat on the floor with those pieces of paper spread around me. They felt light in my hands, but heavy in meaning. That was when the tears finally came. Not loud sobs, just slow, quiet tears that slipped down my face and soaked into my clothes. I cried for the woman I had been, the one who trusted without fear, the one who believed love was enough to keep someone close. I cried for the years that would never come back. When my phone rang later that afternoon, I already knew it was him. I answered. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," I replied. "We do."
He came home that evening. I heard his car before I saw him. The familiar sound felt wrong now, like hearing a voice you no longer recognize. He stood at the door for a moment before coming in. He looked tired, older than he had the day before. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many meals. He avoided my eyes at first, then he looked up. "I didn't plan for you to find out this way," he said. I let him speak. I learned that interrupting only delayed the truth. He told me about her, not in detail, just enough. He said it had started as friendship, that word again. He said he felt lonely, unseen. I listened quietly. When he finished, I asked one question. "How long?" He hesitated. Then he answered. "Years." That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not with noise, not with anger, with clarity. Years meant choices. It meant intention. It meant he woke up every morning and decided again and again to lie to me. I realized then that this was not about the other woman. It was about the space he had slowly left empty inside our marriage. I asked him why he stayed. He said he did not want to hurt me. He said he was afraid. I almost laughed at that, but I did not. Fear had shaped both of us, just in different ways. I told him I needed time, space. He nodded, as if he had expected that. That night, he slept in the guest room. I stayed in our bed, alone. I stared at the wall and felt something new settle into me. Strength. Not loud strength, quiet strength, the kind that grows when there is nothing left to pretend. In the days that followed, I moved slowly through my life. I told the children what they needed to know. No details, just truth. They were hurt, confused. I held them and told them this was not their fault. Inside, I was still breaking, but I was also becoming someone new. I began to see myself not just as a wife, but as a woman who had survived a long silence. One afternoon, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, I realized something important. The turning point was not the phone call, not the bank, not even his confession. The turning point was the moment I stopped asking why I was not enough, because I was. I always had been. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that. The first morning after everything happened, I woke up early. The sunlight was soft, barely spilling into the room. I lay there, listening to the house breathe around me. It felt heavy. My chest ached, not from anger, but from the slow, quiet realization of what had been taken from me. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if life would ever feel ordinary again. My husband was in the guest room, as he had been since the night before. We had not spoken more than a few words, and even those were careful, measured. The silence between us was different from usual. It was not comfortable. It was not protective. It was empty. I got out of bed and walked through the quiet house. The floorboards creaked softly under my feet. I passed the living room where the furniture still looked the same, yet everything felt wrong. The sofa cushions were still plump, the curtains still hung neatly, but the air seemed heavier, thick with unspoken truths. I went to the kitchen and made tea, holding the warm cup in my hands. I sipped slowly, letting the heat move through me, grounding me in the present. Over the next few days, I moved slowly through the house. I did not rush through chores. I took my time cleaning, organizing, and touching objects that had been neglected for years. Each small task felt like reclaiming a part of my life. I went through drawers I had never opened, boxes I had pushed into corners, closets filled with clothes I had not worn for a long time. I found photos from the early years of our marriage, smiling faces, happy eyes, innocent moments frozen in time. I held them gently. I did not feel bitter. I did not want to throw them away. I simply acknowledged that life had once been different, that love had existed in a pure, hopeful form, even if it had changed. I began to take walks every morning, just before the neighborhood woke up. The streets were quiet, almost empty. The air smelled clean, with a faint trace of flowers from someone's garden. I walked without music, without distractions. I let my thoughts drift. Sometimes I thought of the children, sometimes of my husband, sometimes of myself. Each step felt like a reclaiming of space, a gentle way of reminding myself that the world was still alive, even when my life felt uncertain. The first week, I avoided speaking much with my husband. We passed each other in the hallways with soft nods, careful gestures, polite distance. We ate separately, spoke sparingly, and gave each other space to exist without pressure. The house felt quieter than before, and paradoxically, that quiet gave me a sense of control I had not realized I had lost. I began noticing details I had ignored for years: the way sunlight fell through the kitchen window, the sound of birds outside, the soft hum of the refrigerator. These small observations became anchors for my mind, moments of presence in a life that felt like it had been uprooted. I realized that much of my pain was not from his actions alone. It was the silence we had maintained for years. The moments I had not questioned, the times I had held my voice down, the nights I had chosen comfort over confrontation. I acknowledged that I had been complicit in my own quiet suffering, not out of fault, but out of habit. I had chosen peace in exchange for truth, and now the balance of that choice had tilted. Recognizing this, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I could no longer live in shadows. I needed to claim light for myself. Some afternoons, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, staring out the window. My children played in their rooms, unaware of the depth of change I was experiencing. I watched them and thought about how I would explain life to them in ways that would protect their innocence, but teach them resilience. I reminded myself that I had been teaching them strength without knowing it, simply by surviving quietly, enduring with patience. I wanted them to see that life could hurt deeply, but that it was possible to rise again. Weeks passed slowly, but each day I felt a small change. I stopped measuring my value based on his actions. I stopped shrinking my needs to make room for his. I began asking myself simple questions. What do I want for today? What do I need to feel alive? What makes me feel whole? I started cooking meals I liked, rearranging furniture, tending to plants, and creating small rituals that reminded me I existed outside the shadow of betrayal. Every small act of care for myself felt revolutionary. One evening, my husband asked to sit with me at the kitchen table, the same table where the worst truths had been spoken. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He spoke softly, carefully, admitting mistakes and acknowledging pain. He did not ask for forgiveness immediately. He did not try to justify his choices. He only spoke honestly, for the first time in years, and for that I was grateful. I responded honestly as well, speaking of the loneliness I had felt, the emptiness I had endured while standing beside him. We did not argue, we did not shout, we simply spoke, layer by layer, allowing truth to land gently between us. After that conversation, we both understood that healing would take time. There were no guarantees, there were no promises, but there was honesty, and that honesty became the foundation for something fragile yet resilient. We agreed on boundaries, on space, on the necessity of self-care and reflection. We continued to share the household, but emotionally we began to navigate new terrain. Distance no longer felt like punishment, but as a measure of respect for our own processes. I learned to cry without shame. I learned to feel pain without resentment. I learned to allow grief to arrive without being afraid of it. Some days I cried for the life I thought I had. Some days I cried for the woman I had been. Other days I cried simply to release the tension that had built up in my chest for years. I stopped apologizing for needing honesty. I stopped shrinking my expectations to fit someone else's comfort. My children noticed changes in me. They noticed that I was calmer, quieter, but stronger. I spoke with them gently about the importance of truth, about human mistakes, about love and boundaries. I reminded them that they were safe, deeply loved, and never responsible for the choices of adults. I held them close and reassured them without words that they were my priority. Their trust became a source of strength for me. Months passed slowly, but each day I felt a small change. The house began to feel lighter, not joyous yet, but stable. The air felt breathable again. The mornings no longer brought tension in my chest. My husband and I continued our conversations slowly. We spoke about therapy, about understanding patterns, about learning to communicate before silence could grow too long. Forgiveness began to root, not as permission or forgetting, but as release. I forgave him for my own peace. I forgave myself for remaining silent for too long. I began to notice the small beauties of life again: morning sunlight on the floor, the soft hum of the kettle, the wind brushing through leaves. I took walks and let my thoughts wander, no longer afraid of them. I realized that my life had not ended because of betrayal, it had simply shifted into a different, more honest rhythm. I was no longer defined by his actions, only by my own choices. I started making plans, small ones at first, simple joys, moments that reminded me I was alive and whole. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of tea and reflected on the journey. The phone call, the silent weeks, the emotional distance, the conversations, they had changed me. I was no longer the woman who waited silently. I was no longer the woman whose value was measured by someone else's choices. I was fully, painfully, beautifully myself again. That realization brought peace that I had not known I was capable of feeling. The resolution was not about fixing everything. It was not about pretending the past never happened or forcing a perfect ending. It was about acknowledging truth, reclaiming my voice, nurturing my own spirit, and learning to live fully despite pain. It was about understanding that love and betrayal could coexist, that forgiveness was a gift to myself, and that healing was a process, not a single event. Every morning since, I have reminded myself of one truth: I am enough. I have always been enough. My worth is not defined by the choices of others. My life is mine to protect, nurture, and cherish. And in that knowledge, I have found a quiet strength, a calm resilience, and a peace that no betrayal can take from me.
After all the calls, the silences, and the long nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how life had changed so quietly yet so completely, I began to realize that the ending of one chapter was not the end of my life, but rather the beginning of something deeper, a kind of understanding I had never known before, and it came slowly, like dawn stretching across a horizon I had almost forgotten existed. And I began to notice the small details of the world that had once seemed ordinary, but now carried weight. The sunlight spilling gently through the kitchen window, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant laughter of children in the neighborhood, the subtle movement of leaves in the breeze. And I felt that the world had continued while I had been caught in my own quiet storm. And that gave me a strange comfort, because it reminded me that life moves forward, even when our hearts feel heavy, and that I too could move forward if I allowed myself to. And I began to reclaim my days, piece by piece, starting with small acts like making tea for myself, holding the cup in my hands and letting the warmth fill me, walking slowly through the house, tidying spaces that had long been neglected, touching objects that had been forgotten, and noticing that each of these small actions reminded me that I still had control over my life, that I still had ownership over my own body, my own mind, my own heart. And I began to walk outside every morning, without music, without distraction, just listening to the quiet of the streets, feeling the air on my face, noticing the rhythm of my own breathing. And I realized that these walks were not just physical movement, but emotional movement as well. That they were my way of reclaiming myself from the shadow of betrayal, from the years I had spent shrinking, waiting, hoping for someone else to provide what only I could give myself. And I remembered the photographs from our early marriage, the smiles frozen in time, the young faces filled with hope, and I held them gently, acknowledging that love had once been real, even if it had changed. And that understanding allowed me to forgive not only him, but myself for allowing my voice to fade for too long, for choosing peace over truth, for pretending that everything was fine when it was not. And I began to cry, softly at first, then in quiet waves, releasing grief I had carried silently for years. And in that crying, I felt a strange cleansing, a sense that some weight was lifting from my chest. And I began to see clearly that healing is not linear, that it comes in moments, in steps, in breaths, sometimes slow and sometimes jagged, but it always comes if we allow ourselves to feel. And I allowed myself to feel everything: pain, sadness, disappointment, regret, but also hope, relief, and the quiet stirrings of courage. The courage to stand, to face myself honestly, and to make choices for me rather than for anyone else. And I began to speak to my children with more honesty, gently telling them that life is complicated, that adults make mistakes, that love does not always protect people from hurting, and that no matter what happens, they are safe, deeply loved, and never responsible for the actions of others. And seeing their trust in me, their calm acceptance, I felt strength I had forgotten I possessed, a strength that had been quietly growing inside me all along, waiting for me to claim it. And I began to recognize the pattern of my own life, how I had often given my energy, my time, and my voice to others at the expense of myself, and how now, finally, I could reclaim those things without guilt, without fear. And I began to make decisions with clarity, not impulsively, but thoughtfully, for my well-being, for my peace, and for the simple joy of living fully. And in that process, I began to notice my husband again, but differently, not as a source of pain alone, but as a human being who had faltered, who had been afraid to speak, who had walked paths of fear and silence. And while I acknowledged his mistakes, I also understood that my peace did not depend on his repentance or change, that I could live fully, honestly, and with love for myself, regardless of his choices. And this awareness gave me a quiet freedom I had never felt before, a freedom to set boundaries without bitterness, to love without losing myself, to forgive without surrendering my worth. And in that freedom, I found a soft joy, small at first, growing steadily, as I allowed myself to enjoy life again, to notice beauty in ordinary moments, to take pleasure in sunlight on the floor, in the smell of tea, in the quiet music of rain against the window, in the laughter of my children, in the way my own hands moved, capable and strong. And I began to rebuild the rhythm of my life, slowly, deliberately, understanding that healing is a mosaic, not a single event, composed of countless small moments of courage, patience, acceptance, and care. And I learned that the most important relationship I could nurture was the one with myself, that self-respect, self-love, and self-trust are not selfish, but essential. And I began to see my own worth clearly, no longer defined by someone else's choices, no longer diminished by betrayal, no longer hidden beneath fear or silence. And in that clarity, I began to breathe fully again, to stand tall, to walk forward, to reclaim my life with gentle determination. And I realized that this process of rebuilding did not erase the past, did not pretend that pain did not exist, but integrated it into my life as a teacher, as a reminder of my resilience, as proof of my capacity to survive and to thrive.
and I understood that even after heartbreak, even after betrayal, even after years of quiet suffering, it is possible to find peace, to find strength, to find joy again, and that the ending of one chapter is not the conclusion of the story, but the start of a new one. And I could finally say that I had emerged from this experience not diminished but renewed, not bitter but wise, not silent but strong. And I had learned that life is not about perfection or avoiding pain, but about facing it, acknowledging it, learning from it, and continuing to move forward with integrity and courage. And I wanted to close this story with a message that felt true and tender, that for anyone listening, anyone who has experienced betrayal, disappointment, or heartbreak, it is possible to rise again, to reclaim your voice, to trust yourself, to find quiet strength even in the deepest shadows, to live fully, to love fully, to forgive when you are ready, and to hold hope in your heart without fear. And I want you to know that the woman I am now, after all this, is not defined by the past, but by the choices I make today, by the gentle care I give myself, by the courage I carry quietly, and that even when the world feels uncertain, even when others fail us, even when love hurts, we can still find beauty, peace, and resilience within ourselves. And that is the truest ending I can give this story. A woman who has been hurt, who has faced the truth, who has grieved, who has cried, who has grown, who has healed, who has chosen herself, and continues to live with dignity, hope, and quiet, unwavering strength, walking into tomorrow with a heart that is whole enough to love again, and a spirit brave enough to meet life fully, no matter what comes next. And that is how my story finally ends. Not with anger, not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with a calm, enduring, heartfelt understanding that life continues, love persists, and hope is always possible if we choose to hold it.